Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up in today's program. The European Union condemns Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses UNIFIL of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah. At least 22 people are killed, 80 others injured in airstrikes on a school-turned-shelter in central Gaza. This comes as 4 Palestinians are killed and dozens are injured after Israeli fighter jets bombed tents on the grounds of Gaza's Al-Aqsa hospital. And the Israeli military says 4 soldiers have been killed, more than 60 others have been injured after Hezbollah launched a drone attack on an Israeli army base in central northern Israel. Well, I'm joined now by Andrea Tenenti, who is a spokesperson for UNIFIL, that is the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon. Andrea joins us from Beirut. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I know it's a very busy time for you. Just to help our viewers understand, UNIFIL is tasked with monitoring a ceasefire for a war that ended in 2006. That was the 33-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. Now that there's something closer to active engagement and warfare between Israel and Hezbollah, what is the role of UNIFIL?
Well, now the role of UNIFIL is even more important than ever, because it's important to bring back stability in the south of Lebanon. Our peacekeepers are still on the ground, despite requests by IDF, Israeli forces, to move from some of the position close to the blue line. But the decision was to stay. It's important for the UN flag to fly in south of Lebanon. It's important to be there because we have been asked by the Security Council and also by the international community. It's important to still have some monitoring capabilities, not only to report to New York, to the Security Council, to the international community, but also to assist the local populations. Of course, our mandate and our capabilities have been challenged. Resolution 1701 also has been challenged in recent months. But the main provisions of safety, security, stability, support to the Lebanese army are still valid. What's important now is the full implementation of 1701. But the implementation is not with the mission. We can support it, but it's up to the parties. So we need to go back to the cessation of hostilities and find a viable solutions or agreement to bring back stability to this region.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is calling on UNIFIL to withdraw forces for your own safety, or for their own safety, I should say. That implies they're in grave danger if they stay, doesn't it?
Well, we were told, as I said, by the F days ago to move some of the positions. And yesterday, the Prime Minister addressed directly the Secretary General, who issued a very clear statement. We are staying in the south. That's our role. We are mandated by the Security Council. We cannot have member states to dictate the fate of a peacekeeping mission that is the will of the international community. So it's important to be here, to monitor, to have an international impartial presence in the south. And again, it's also important at the moment for main stakeholders and Security Council and to find solution to this conflict, to find a political and diplomatic solution.
And what is that solution? Because we're in an impasse here. Does it rest with the UN Security Council?
The solution, of course, is something that needs to be negotiated by the parties. But we have said all along, 1701, Resolution 1701, which is the resolution that stopped the conflict in 2006, the main provisions are still valid right now. Of course, as I said earlier, the resolution has been heavily challenged, but the main provisions are still there. What we need is commitment from the parties. What we need is the full implementation of Resolution 1701. Then, of course, will be up to the Security Council to decide how to move forward or if there are needs for amendment to the resolution, but the main provisions are still valid. full deployment of the Lebanese army to the south of Lebanon, ensuring that the south of Lebanon from the Litani to the Blue Line doesn't have weapons, only the Lebanese army, bring back state authority, not have air violations or ground violation from the IDF, and also long-term solution. We have been working until last October, before the conflict started, for 18 years, in visibly marking the Blue Line. A lot of work was done. A Blue Line, a border that does not exist between these two countries. So there was work that was done between 2006 until last year. We had the longest period of stability in the region. We need to go back to that. I don't say that is easy. It's very challenging. The region is very challenging, but it's important to continue to go back to the cessation of hostilities and work on long-term solutions.
Just going back to the reported attacks, the attacks that happened on UNIFIL outposts throughout southern Lebanon, they've been described by UNIFIL and others as deliberate attacks. How can we be sure they're deliberate?
Well, when you have monitoring from our positions, Israeli tanks hitting a tower inside our position in Nahura, inside the headquarters, this is deliberate. When Israeli forces, they also hit our cameras with a drone. They go inside the bunker, close to a bunker where peacekeepers are sheltering. When illumination is hit, these are deliberate attacks against our peacekeepers. And we've been very vocal, not only UNIFIL, but the international community. This is a violation of Resolution 1701, but it's also a violation of international humanitarian law.
Yeah, I saw these reports about attacks on your cameras, and I didn't really find very much out about what the cameras were for. What are they for?
Well, the cameras, they give us the possibility of seeing immediately outside the perimeter of our base for security reasons, for the security and safety of our peacekeepers. Illumination the same. We need to have lights inside our compounds in order to not only to be able to see, but to keep that kind of visibility inside the base. When you enter with a drone close to one of our bunkers, this is concerning.
Okay. UNIFIL says it speaks to both sides. That I assume means you've got some dialogue with Hezbollah, some dialogue with Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding of that. Given that you're talking to both sides, I'd just like to ask where you see things heading to, given what you're hearing from both sides.
Well, our communication channel is with the Lebanese authorities, with the Lebanese army, and with the IDF. We don't have an open channel of communications with Hezbollah. Of course, when we speak to the Lebanese authorities and to the Lebanese army, the message are conveyed to Hezbollah. But the communication at the moment is not only related to deconflict and decrease the tension, but very much related at this specific moment to ensure that peacekeepers are not a target.
And how do you respond to the accusation that Israel has leveled at UNIFIL for providing Hezbollah with, quote, human shields? How do you respond to that specifically?
Well, what I've said just now, about the human shields. We had Israeli defense forces a few meters away from our positions. We had Israeli forces entering inside our base on Sunday morning and stay inside our positions for 45 minutes. So I don't know where are the human shield or who is using UNIFIL, but when you are in a situation with IDF troops inside Lebanese territories and there is an exchange of fire between Hezbollah and IDF, we are in the middle. So the concerns is from both sides that we need the parties needs to ensure and there is one of their obligation to ensure security and safety of our troops. So the facts are pretty clear what's happening right now and the issue of human shields.
Yeah, of course, firing on peacekeepers would be a war crime, wouldn't it?
Well, this was something that the Secretary General said yesterday, and in one of on the statement. But at the moment, we have been lucky that peacekeepers have been just injured. And this is a serious violations, and that's something that has been a huge concern for the international community. As I said, member states and troop contributing countries have been even more vocal about these attacks.
Given, as you were saying earlier, there is dialogue between UNIFIL and the Lebanese and the Israelis. I wonder what response you had to your Israeli contacts when you hear things like what the Israeli Minister of Energy, Eli Cohen, has said in the last day or two. He called UNIFIL a useless force, and he called the UN a failed organization. What would you say to your Israeli contacts when you hear remarks like that made about your forces and your organization?
We are not here to comment on every statement issued by political entities, ministers. We are working with the parties. We are working with the IDF. We are doing our job. We have been able, as I said before, to try to bring some stability. In the past, there was a lot of work that needs to be done. Here, 1701 needs to be implemented. 1701 is the responsibility of the parties. It's not the responsibility of the mission for implementation. So we don't need to comment on everything that minister from either side or from all around the world are saying about the mission. We are just working with the parties and again report to the Security Council and trying to at the moment focus on try to bring back stability to the south of Lebanon. But again, I would say that it's a huge responsibility on member states also to do that, because the conflict that we're seeing in these days between Lebanon and Israel, or between Hezbollah and Israel, is a conflict that could potentially trigger a regional conflict. So this could have catastrophic consequences. So the moment is not to raise the tension, to increase the tension, but to find viable solutions. And it's important for Security Council or main stakeholders to take this as a main priority.
Yeah, just tell us what you mean by that, because I've heard you use that same phrase before. This risks turning into a regional conflict with catastrophic impact for everyone. Catastrophic and everyone. Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by those two words.
It's not what I mean, what everyone has been saying. The conflict at the moment, we see what's happening in Gaza, we see what's happening with Iran, with all the regional powers. So anything can trigger something much bigger, because it's not only limited to a couple of countries. It has more impact in the whole region. And whatever has impact in the region could also have wider consequences. So it's very simple and very clear what's happening at the moment. This conflict has been going on not for a few weeks. It's 12 months, more than 12 months, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in different other areas in the region. So the consequences, of course, could be regional. And this is not something that comes out from our statements, but pretty much everyone in the international community and diplomacy is saying and warning about the consequences that a regional conflict could bring to this part of the world.
And when you speak to your Israeli contacts and you give them warnings like the one you just articulated there, does it come with some advice as well? Do you tell them how you think they should proceed, or do you suggest to them that one course of action might be better than another? And what sort of a response do you tend to get from them?
This conversation is confidential between the head of mission and the parties, so I don't have this kind of information, and this information is more related to the conflict, the situation, and they are not shared publicly, but communication is ongoing.
Okay, just wanted to ask you about the humanitarian situation on the ground in southern Lebanon. I know that a lot of the towns and villages are empty, but not entirely empty. Some people couldn't evacuate for whatever reason. Just tell us what the humanitarian situation is and how UNIFIL and other UN entities are managing to help people trapped by the violence to get access to essential supplies.
That's the problem. The problem is that we are not allowed to do that, because the conflict does not allow to move to all these areas. Very difficult. Because whenever we try to deconflict humanitarian activities, and we do it every day with our UN agencies and local NGOs and Red Cross, we are not allowed because of security reasons, because the situation is too dangerous to move around. And
Who's telling you that? Who's saying you're not allowed to move around?
When we deconflict these activities with the IDF. So or there are no responses, or they say that the security situation would not be able to ensure the safety of this convoy. So we have been able to do some assistance, to bring some assistance to all these villages. There are thousands of people stuck in these areas without the most basic needs. And it's important to assist them and to support them. But at the moment, it's been very challenging. And I think it's very relevant for everyone to understand that humanitarian assistance has to be given, protection of civilian has to be granted to all the people that are still in the south of Lebanon, although thousands and thousands have left and went up to the north.
Okay, this is my last question to you. I mean, in 2006, it was a 33-day war between Israel and Hezbollah. Just looking forwards from here, it doesn't sound like there's any sign of any end to the violence anytime soon. What sort of a time frame could we potentially be looking at here, Andrea?
Well, if I had the answer, probably I would not be here. And we had 34 days of conflict in 2006, but it was a completely different conflict. The only things that was similar, that was the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, but there was no other conflicts in the area. The conflict right now is way more lethal. At the time, there were no drones used. So a completely different kind of conflict, very unpredictable, very difficult to guess. And that's why it's dangerous. And that's why we are warning everyone that this could have really huge repercussions for the region. And it's important for the international community to step in and take it as a main priority to solve this conflict that has already been killing thousands of people and damaged and destroyed the region across the blue line for the last 12 months.
Andrea Tenenti, spokesperson for UNIFIL, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the European Union has condemned Israel's attacks on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon and dismissed claims that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is hindering the Israeli army. That's according to Associated Press. Well, this comes as recent attacks have left 5 peacekeepers injured, with most of the blame placed on Israeli forces. Well, the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, stated that their work is vital and that attacking UN troops is completely unacceptable. Before a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg, Borrell emphasized that only the UN Security Council can decide whether to relocate UNIFIL peacekeepers, and urging that Secretary-General Guterres should not be blamed. Well, yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called for UNIFIL to follow Israel's warnings to evacuate, accusing them of acting as a human shield for Hezbollah. Well, in a video directed at Guterres, who is currently banned from entering Israel, Netanyahu urged the UN chief to remove UNIFIL from the danger zone.
I would like to appeal directly to the UN Secretary General. It is time for you to remove UNIFIL from Hezbollah strongholds and from the fighting areas. The IDF has repeatedly asked for this and has been met with repeated refusals, all aimed at providing a human shield to Hezbollah terrorists. Your refusal to evacuate the UNIFIL soldiers makes them hostages of Hezbollah. This endangers both them and the lives of our soldiers. We regret the injury to the UNIFIL soldiers, and we are doing everything in our power to prevent this injury. But the simple and obvious way to ensure this is simply to get them out of the danger zone.
Mr. Secretary General, get the UNIFIL forces out of harm's way. It should be done right now, immediately.
Well, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has also condemned Israel's call for the mission to leave. This after urging EU member states to pull the plug on a free trade agreement with Israel. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by the independent Irish senator and former captain in the Irish Army who took part in a peacekeeping mission to Lebanon in 1996. Dr. Tom Clonan, thank you very much for speaking to Al Arabiya News. Can I just start by asking for your reaction to the news of these attacks on UNIFIL positions in southern Lebanon during the last week or two?
It's a grave development, and it's a breach of international laws of armed conflict and UN Security Council Resolution 1701 of 2006, which prohibits either the Israeli Defense Forces or, for that matter, groups like Hezbollah from opening fire on United Nations peacekeepers in South Lebanon. So it's a grave development, and I think taken in context of Benjamin Netanyahu's advisory today, for the UN to evacuate, which was the word he used, from South Lebanon, it shows that the attacks on the United Nations were not the sort of spontaneous actions of Israeli commanders on the ground, but is part of an Israeli political and military strategy to get the United Nations, in other words, the international community, to get them out of Lebanon so that the Israelis can have full reign in that border area.
In a piece you wrote in the last week or so, you said Irish troops in Lebanon are now acting as observers in what is a de facto war zone. That means what they're doing is not what they're supposed to be doing, is it?
Well, we can still partially complete the mission in that, unlike the situation in Gaza, where you didn't have the international community, monitoring the activities of the Israelis on the one hand or Hamas on the other, and the Israelis were able to behave in the way that they have, resulting in the deaths of, at this stage, 42,000, mostly innocent men, women and children. So whilst we're not able to patrol at the moment in a meaningful way, the 10,000 troops of UNIFIL, it's a 50-nation coalition, can hold Israel to account for its actions on the ground. And if we were forced to leave, I do think that would be a very dark moment, for the Lebanese civilians that are left behind, that are trapped in the villages close to the blue line, and also those Lebanese civilians who remain in cities like Tyre and Sidon. If they were to see the UN flag taken down, the lights to go off, and all of these international peacekeepers and observers to leave, I think it would be a terrifying moment for them, because I think it would signal to them that the actions that Netanyahu has carried out in Gaza are about to be replicated in Lebanon.
But that's not like to happen, is it? Because that's not what UNIFIL's saying. They're saying they're not going to go anywhere.
At the moment, I think the United Nations may redeploy some of their troops. I think the ground action is intensifying. There's no doubt about that. The Israelis have committed 4 divisions of ground and mechanized troops to the incursion. And I think as it becomes clearer over the coming days, what precisely are the axes of advance of the Israelis? So we know they're operating in the area of Naqoura, which is on the Mediterranean. It's the first Lebanese town just north of the Israeli town of Rosh Hanikra, where UN headquarters is. I think they're going to move up the coast road towards Tyre and ultimately Sidon on that line of advance. They're also recently active in the area of Ramia, which is in the center of UN Sector West, where the Ghanaian troops are, where they penetrated the perimeter of their post and injured peacekeepers with smoke rounds and other munitions in the last 24 hours. And over in the east, where the Irish are, which is near Maroun al-Raz and Yarun and Bint Jabal. So we can see, it's a multi-pronged approach, a number of axes of advance. And when we have a clearer picture of where they're going, the UN might decide to redeploy troops where they can still observe but not be in the direct line of fire. Having said that, the Hezbollah attacks on Benjamin in Israel and at the military base south of Haifa, which has inflicted quite a lot of casualties, I think that's going to increase the pressure on Netanyahu to intensify his operations. And I think, inevitably that will lead to armed confrontation with United Nations troops, as has happened in the past.
And they'll be in a difficult situation, won't they, the Israelis, in territory like that of Southern Lebanon. It's very different from Gaza. You know the terrain because you were there. What are your thoughts about what an Israeli, what armed confrontation between the two sides would look like in that part of Southern Lebanon?
I think it's going to be very bitterly contested. And I think it's important to point out that Hezbollah also have breached the laws of armed conflict and are in breach of the Geneva Conventions by firing missiles at civilian targets in northern Israel, in Galilee and elsewhere. So all parties to this conflict have shown that they're prepared to commit war crimes. I'm sorry to use such a blunt term. So I expect, as you say, Hezbollah are not Hamas, and Lebanon is not the tightly packed, densely populated area that Gaza is. Hezbollah will have plenty of room for maneuver. They literally will have more battle space than was available to Hamas. And we've already seen in the exchanges of fire that the Hezbollah have been able to inflict casualties on the Israelis, notwithstanding the pager attacks of the end of September, the sort of dismantling of their command and control functions, the killing of Sheikh Nasrallah. So, I think it's going to be bitterly contested. In 2006, the Israelis suffered quite a few casualties, and I think they were a little bit surprised at Hezbollah's capacity to kind of meet force with force on the ground. Like the Irish, we've been in Lebanon on a continuous basis since 1978. And in that 50-year period, when there have been incursions, we've lost troops to both sides, and to both the Israelis and their Israeli-backed militias, and also from Islamic resistance groups like Hamas and others. So I think it's inevitable that, because we are literally human shields now between the warring parties, trying to protect the civilian population, trying to observe and report on what's happening, I think there's a grave danger that we will lose people in the coming weeks as this ground incursion intensifies.
Yeah, and that's an area where you and the Israeli Prime Minister appear to agree on, because he used the same language, saying that UNIFIL peacekeepers are indeed being used as human shields there. In terms of a response from the international community, well, since you're in Ireland, I'd just like to ask you what you'd like to hear from the Irish government. We have heard some words of condemnation for attacks on UNIFIL forces. Ireland has 370 or so troops on the ground there. Perhaps more than words, what would you like to see the Irish authorities, the Irish leadership saying?
Well, the Irish government has been very vocal in its condemnation of the retaliatory nature of Israel's operations in Gaza, particularly. And we were one of the first European Union countries to move forward and formally recognize the state of Israel, along with our Spanish partners. In relation to Lebanon, our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Micheál Martin, has been very clear. He said that you cannot destroy a nation just simply to dismantle a resistance group like Hamas or Hezbollah. That is, Israel has the right to defend itself, but it doesn't have the right to, breach international law in doing so. We've had a lot of experience of conflict on this island, myself included. With regard to Lebanon, we have experienced this before. For example, when I was there in '96 during the Israeli Operation Grapes of Wrath, where they targeted all of South Lebanon, the situation became so grave that we took over 200 terrified Lebanese civilians onto our UN position at Al Yaton. And within days, the Israelis had targeted our neighboring UN position at Qana, killing 106 Lebanese men, women, and children in one incident. And that prompted the Clinton administration in April 1996 to broker a ceasefire between Hezbollah and the Israeli forces. And I think, and I'm sorry to say this, but I think there will be some sort of a mass casualty incident or a catastrophe that may actually prompt the United States to get involved, because I think they're the only people at the moment who can persuade Benjamin Netanyahu to stop this, what I think is potentially a catastrophic and destabilizing intervention in Lebanon. I think it risks direct confrontation with Iran and, a regional war. In practical terms, the Irish government, there's very little they can do, although we could close our controlled airspace to flights emanating from the United States that are delivering weapons and ammunition to the Israeli Defense Forces. That's something that actually the Irish government has taken steps to prevent now.
Yeah, and the Irish and the Spanish are talking about pulling the plug on a free trade agreement with Israel as well. Do you think that will make a difference?
I think any and all pressure has to be brought to bear. And I say this, I absolutely believe in the right of Israel to exist and the right of Israel to defend itself. And I absolutely condemn the actions of Hamas and Hezbollah, who continue to breach international law by firing missiles and holding hostages and so on. These are criminal acts. But the principal victims in this conflict are the innocent men, women, and children of Gaza, now Lebanon. And when you think of the numbers now killed in Lebanon, over 2,000 dead, many of whom are civilians, and over 6,000 very seriously injured people. I mean, I've seen the effects of high explosives at close quarters. The burning, the soft tissue injuries, the blast effects, shrapnel, which leads to limb separation and decapitation. So Lebanon is now experiencing the same casualty rate as has been inflicted on Gaza in just the last few weeks. And really, the world has to bring this to a halt. This has to stop. It is potentially, it could lead to a regional war with wider implications, to be honest.
Yeah, and just lastly, because we're almost out of time, I just wanted to ask you, we're coming up to sort of 30 years since you were involved in a peacekeeping mission in Lebanon. I mean, how it makes you feel to see that part of Lebanon, not to mention the rest of the region, drawn into a horrific conflict involving mass losses of life on all sides.
It's very depressing. And, when I was in Lebanon as a young officer, we witnessed killings on a large scale. And again, the principal victims were innocent men, women, and children. And I never thought that I would see a repeat of that exercise and the failure that it brings, because this does nothing to assist Israel's security and its survival in the medium to long term. I think Israel, under the leadership of Netanyahu, they risk sowing the seeds of their own destruction, because we know from Ireland's history of oppression and terrorism and violence that violence begets violence. I mean, this will strengthen support for Hamas, for groups like Hezbollah. I feel so sorry for the people of Israel, for the people of Lebanon, the people of Gaza and the West Bank, because what's missing here is positive leadership. We have toxic leadership in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu, latterly Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, the Iranian leadership. It's toxic masculinity. It's with a propensity for conflict that will only make things worse and not better. We need a diplomatic and political solution, and we need courageous leadership that is ethically oriented and that has moral authority. It's sadly lacking at the moment.
Okay, well, on that powerful note, we'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Tom Clonan. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
To Gaza now, where at least 4 Palestinians have been killed and dozens of others injured after Israeli fighter jets bombed a tent camp on the grounds of the Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir al-Balah. Well, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital officials say that 25 people were transferred to the Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza just afterwards, suffering from severe burns. This all happens as doctors are working under difficult circumstances to treat women, children and the elderly who have been burnt in the strikes. Well, the Israeli military says that it's been targeting militants hiding amongst civilians. Well, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the central city of Deir al-Balah was already struggling to care for a large number of wounded individuals from an earlier strike on a school-turned-shelter in nearby Nuseirat, a strike that killed at least 22 people and injured 80 others when that strike hit in the early hours of the morning, and it engulfed many tents into flames. Well, let's get some more analysis now, and I can speak to Oxfam's policy lead in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel, Bushra Khalidi. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Since you're in Ramallah, I thought I'd just start by asking you about developments in the West Bank, because we're receiving reports of a deadly Israeli raid in Jenin today. If you could just bring us up to speed on what you're hearing and what the latest is in the West Bank, and then we'll move on to Gaza.
I mean, I think it's important to underscore that the military raids that are happening in, major population centers across the West Bank, and we've seen that in the last couple of weeks, but these are a daily occurrence for Palestinians living in the West Bank. Military raids happen in Ramallah, where I am, very regularly. Of course, the intensity and the use of, really deadly and lethal weapons and bombs and airstrikes have been a new kind of component of Israel's military raids in town centers like Jenin and Nablus and Tulkarem. But they continue to be part of Israel's policy of creating coercive environments for Palestinians living under military occupation. And this includes policies of collective punishment, which we see in Gaza as well, whereby they, either besiege an entire city, close down all of the entries and the exits, and prevent people from moving in order to carry out their military operations that end up with extensive collateral damage, whereby the last time there was the big military operation in Jenin, they literally leveled the roads and completely bulldozed them. So these are, policies are definitely intensifying, but we have about 700 military checkpoints. On Friday, I have a piece of land right outside of Ramallah that we go and farm on the weekends. It's about 20-minute drive from where I live. We weren't able to go because of the military checkpoints on all exits of Ramallah, preventing us from moving. It's the same for traders, for businessmen, for people going to school, to universities, or to even hospitals. We are prevented from our, basic right of freedom of movement. We can't move from one city to another city without having to encounter these Israeli military checkpoints that cause not just immense traffic, but also a lot of stress. And often, people can get stopped for hours at these checkpoints. Not just that, it's just been the extrajudicial killings of Palestinian unarmed civilians across the West Bank in record numbers. And now we have the olive harvest that's starting in the West Bank, actually last week officially. And we expect it to be a bloodbath. Because of settlers taking the opportunity to attack Palestinian families, harvesting their olives. It's a tradition of ours, and it's always a very scary time for Palestinian communities and farmers.
Yeah, and actually you're just speaking about your own personal experience. I was reading about a report that your family home in East Jerusalem came under attack. Some Israeli settlers tried to seize it. That was back in April, May, June, if I'm not mistaken. I just wanted to ask you what the latest was with regard to that, and are they okay?
I mean, it was in June, and yes, settlers forcibly entered our home under the full protection and cover of Israeli policemen who were there and did absolutely nothing. They beat up my brother at the time and prevented us from even entering our own home, believe it or not. But we were able to get an injunction of the court, and after 48 hours, the settlers were forced to leave. But the thing is that the threat remains there. The threat is always omnipresent, and we have to protect our homes. At the time, I never really thought that this could happen to us because we have the paperwork, and we were lucky in that sense because these are old properties of the old city. Often people don't have the paperwork or don't have the resources to get lawyers, which fortunately we have the privilege of having. So often, people are unable to get the cases going and battling them through the courts because they don't have enough resources. But also, the threat remains there. We have settlers that live right next to our house in the old city, and And we know that they're always eyeing that property because of its location and because of its, of this being a policy where they are able to do this with complete impunity under the eyes and protection of Israeli forces.
Yeah, I mean, really distressing personal account you just gave us there. Let's talk about what's happening in northern Gaza. No food has entered that part of the enclave, we gather, since the start of this month. We're already the 14th of the month, and I'm assuming that means people are, in many cases, on the brink of starvation. How are people surviving?
I mean, again, it's just to underscore this policy of collective punishment. This is something that we endure and know very well at the hands of, Israel's military occupation. And again, we're seeing the same policies being applied across Gaza, but at levels that are, absolutely horrific and unfathomable, unimaginable for me, where they are denying humanitarian aid to almost 500,000 people that are in the northern part of Gaza, and at the same time forcing them to leave and having these forcible evacuation orders where they're asking people to leave their homes. But where to? There's nowhere safe in Gaza. If anything, these families have seen their friends and their relatives evacuate to the south and completely destitute, living in absolute, horrible, horrific, inhumane conditions in the south. And so they were not, why would they follow suit when they have no guarantees of any type of safety, of any type of shelter, or access to the most basic of services? Right now, our partner, the Coastal Municipal Water Authority, informed me yesterday that the Israelis not only have denied aid to Beit Lahia, Jabalia and Beit Hanun since the 1st of October, but yesterday they denied the entry of fuel to these three areas of the northern Gaza Strip, meaning that there is 0% water production at the moment in those three areas and in the northern in that part of Gaza. So not only are humanitarian aid unable to get their convoys up there, not only are our operations completely halted, and we've been explicitly denied from accessing those communities who are now facing the most vulnerable and urgent and alarming needs, but they're also cutting off the water, cutting off water to almost we don't even know how many people out of the 500,000 are in Jabalia and Beit Hanun, but I expect a couple 100,000. I mean, in what world do we cut off water and deny people just water? In what world are we living in where there's silence and nobody's saying anything, and we're only expressing concern at what is happening in northern Gaza? We are raising northern Gaza at the moment. We've seen entire neighborhoods leveled to the ground. We've seen the refugee camp bombed. We've seen people sheltering bombed. We saw the Al-Aqsa hospital images this morning. Absolutely. I mean, I don't even have, again, words to describe the horror of seeing people burn alive, being crisped, intense, displaced multiple times. They're probably in the hospitals because they have family members that are there that are either getting treatment or cannot move. And you bomb displaced people living in displaced tents. I mean, what world are we living in?
Yeah, I mean, there are these reports, aren't there, and I'm sure you're aware of them, Bushra, of this so-called general's plan that was put forward by these retired Israeli generals. And the suggestion was that Israel use pretty much the tactics you've been describing, starvation tactics, to clear certain areas of a Hamas presence. I don't think I've articulated it entirely as the plan is laid out. But I mean, it sounds as though that plan's already in action, doesn't it?
Well, so there's nothing confirmed. And so I'm unable to confirm whether that plan is in action or being implemented. What we know of the plan is, the idea to basically, in order to seek, to basically forcibly displace the remaining population in the north to the south. And so, yes, it's not been officially confirmed, but currently what we are seeing from the current military incursions is an evacuation orders from last week signals a trend of forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to the south, while denying them humanitarian aid. And this is a deliberate action. This potentially could amount to a deliberate act of starvation and using starvation as a weapon of war, which is, what our analysis confirmed in the beginning months of Israel's onslaught on Gaza last year, and yet the international community remains passive and standing idle. Whereby they have actual duties and obligations to prevent this atrocity and use all their tools at their disposal to stop this disaster that we're seeing unfold in the north of Gaza.
Yeah, people are saying things, and even within Israel, there are reports of Israeli NGOs putting out a collective statement saying there are alarming signs the Israeli military is beginning to quietly implement that plan we were just talking about, the general's plan. States have an obligation to prevent the crimes of starvation and forcible transfer. So there are voices even within Israel. And then we've heard just in the last, during the course of this afternoon, China saying the humanitarian disaster in Gaza must end. China summoned the Israeli envoy to China and told them that. Do you get the impression that the Israeli leadership would listen to anyone at this stage? Do you think they're listening to any of their allies or world powers like China?
We know that. At this point, we know that statements of condemnation and slapping Israel's fingers is not enough. We need action. That's not action. This is just statements. It's words. We need action. And we know what the actions are. The ICJ set out very clearly in its advisory opinion of July the measures that third states can take to ensure Israel abides by international law. And, this includes, for example, halting arms transfers to Israel and the transfer of lethal weapons to Israel. That would be a great start for third states to start. And there's plenty of other tools in their toolbox. And we, as humanitarians, don't need to be the ones spelling them out for them. They know them very well. They've used them in other contexts. And we are urging to prevent complicity, to prevent further atrocity crimes, to prevent impunity, and to actually respect international law, respect the international rules-based order, to actually use your tools in your toolbox so that you are not complicit in what is happening in Gaza, and so that you are also, as a third state, abiding by international law and abiding by your duties and your obligations, and not just legal obligations, your moral obligations to act and do something to stop this. And we have not seen this in any meaningful way from the international community yet.
Sure, and just tell us a little bit about what Oxfam is doing on the ground in Gaza. What's the scope of your activities, Bushra?
Originally, before kind of responding to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we worked a lot with farmers, kind of giving them seed money to grow their crops, to, start small businesses through kind of agricultural and farming communities in Gaza. We do a lot of work on gender-based violence, MHPSS support, and we have a big program in water and sanitation and hygiene, where we've repaired infrastructure or installed infrastructure, repaired pipelines, etc. Right now, during our humanitarian response, our response looks like, for example, delivering fruit and veg boxes in the beginning of the war, hygiene kits. adolescent kits as well, water trucking to affected communities. We've provided MHPSS support in UNRWA shelters, for example. So it ranges. We've installed latrines in, makeshift kind of camps. We've also installed mini small desalination units back before Rafah incursion had happened in Rafah at the time, where it would desalinate water for a few thousand people. We are, for example, one thing that is pending and that's been restricted from Israeli authorities from entering is water kind of chlorine tablets to test water. So like testing kits to test the adequacy of water. That's been, for example, prevented from entering. And one, I think, or two of our desalination plants have also been rejected. So yeah, that's what our work looks like in Gaza.
And just before we finish, I wanted maybe, perhaps if you could appeal to the Israeli government, if you had a message for the international community with regards to the situation in northern Gaza, what would that message be?
I mean, my message to the international community is very clear. It's, you have duties, you have obligations. The bar is even higher after the ICJ advisory opinion of July and the South Africa's court case in the new year on the Genocide Convention. They have a legal duty and a legal obligation to prevent this. And otherwise they risk being complicit in the atrocity crimes that we're seeing unfold in Gaza. And therefore they must act. They have to use their tools in their toolbox. They need to halt arms transfers to Israel and any other measures that will put pressure on Israel. We need the international community to not just rely on statements of condemnation. It's no longer enough. We need real measures. The ICJ deemed the occupation illegal and has asked for the dismantlement of settlements and the occupation within a specific time frame. And third states have clear obligations under this. And they should abide by that. Otherwise, they risk undermining our international rules-based system. They risk undermining the international, law and order systems that we have in place to prevent these things from happening. And they risk this escalating even more than it already has, and even more than we already predicted that it would. And it will also put at risk other civilians in other contexts.
Okay, well, we appreciate you sharing all of that with us, and we wish you and Oxfam and your colleagues all the very best in your activities in the region. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you for having me.
Bushra Khalidi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, bye.
To Israel now, where 4 soldiers are known to have been killed, more than 60 others injured after Hezbollah launched a drone attack on an Israeli military base in central northern Israel. Well, military officials say the drone struck an army base near Binyamina, which is about 50 kilometers from the Lebanese border. Well, Israeli officials say that the 4 soldiers who died were all under 19 years of age, and they were all undergoing military infantry training, while 8 others are reported to be severely injured. Well, that incident, which occurred late on Sunday, is one of the deadliest attacks on Israel since the war began last October. Well, Hezbollah has claimed responsibility, stating that it was in response to recent Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon. Well, Israel's military, meanwhile, says it will look into how the drone was able to enter Israeli airspace without triggering an alert. Meanwhile, earlier today, Israel's military said it has successfully intercepted several projectiles fired from Lebanon after explosives were heard over the same military base that a Hezbollah drone struck the night before. Well, in a statement, they said, quote, following the sirens that sounded a short while ago in this area of Sharon, Menashe, and in the Wadi Ara, a number of projectiles were identified crossing from Lebanon into Israel territory. Well, the IF successfully intercepted all of those projectiles. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now from Jerusalem by Israel's Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya, Fleur. Really appreciate you taking the time. I wanted to start by asking you about Sunday's deadly attack in Binyamina, carried out by Hezbollah. Just for the benefit of our viewers who might not know the geography of Israel, Binyamina is 30 kilometers south of Haifa. Just tell us a bit more about what happened there.
So unfortunately, it was a deadly attack, many injured, 5 soldiers, unfortunately, who lost their lives, a drone attack on a military base. And there were no sirens, no chance for anybody to go into a shelter. As a result, from what I hear today, the protocols for these types of attacks are being adjusted. It was a very bad day for Israel. And unfortunately, for the entire north and for what's going on in the north, I want to remind everybody that on the 8th of October, completely unprovoked, Hezbollah attacked communities in the northern border of the Lebanese border with Israel. 10 kilometers from that border have been completely evacuated. Also, a couple died last week, were killed by a rocket. And so we have a situation when we're at war in the north for an attack that starts against us on the 8th of October, and the war in the south when Hamas brutally massacred innocent civilians on the 7th of October. So at the moment, we're very directly fighting these two front wars. Of course, we're fighting many more fronts than that. Indeed. And the fact that Hezbollah managed to strike, by all accounts, pretty deep inside Israeli territory. I was just looking at a map of Binyamina. I mean, that will have taken a lot of people by surprise. And it suggests, doesn't it, that perhaps Hezbollah's capability has been underestimated. Well, we always knew that Hezbollah could attack as far as Tel Aviv. So it's not surprising that they got to Binyamina. Binyamina is still in the north. What's going on is they're incessantly attacking Haifa. Haifa is a mixed city of Jews and Arabs, and they are incessantly attacking Haifa, making it the new Kiryat Shmona, as we call it. Kiryat Shmona is on the northern border, but now they're attacking further inland, and we know they have the capabilities. And what Israel's been trying to do, of course, for the last few weeks, and quite successfully for the most part, is degrading those capabilities. But we always knew that Hezbollah are the most dangerous terrorists armed by the Islamic Republic Iran that we have. Hezbollah is saying this is nothing compared to what's in store for Israel if it continues hitting Lebanon. I mean, Hezbollah sounding extremely defiant despite numerous setbacks, what you'd have thought was a significant degradation of their leadership and their capability. But there's no sign whatsoever, is there, that they're backing down? Well, there's one thing is rhetoric and one thing is reality. And we know that back channeling, they're begging for a ceasefire. So they can talk big, but ultimately they understand that they've been significantly degraded. They've got nowhere to go but down at the moment. Israel is doing a good job of cleaning out anywhere between 10 to 15 kilometers from the border. The job that UNIFIL should have done since 2005, since Resolution 1701, which they didn't do. Israel is having to put in its own soldiers and do, because unfortunately Hezbollah can't be trusted. And they've been shelling our northern border communities. We can't have a situation where we have 70,000 evacuated Israelis who can't go home because Hezbollah is attacking the northern border communities. So then Israel has to create the buffer zone that UNIFIL should have created, which was agreed upon by the UN with Resolution 1701. Israel's having to do the job that UNIFIL didn't do. And with regards to those peacekeepers in Lebanon, the UNIFIL peacekeepers, 5 blue helmets have been injured in the last few days, a condemnation from right across the globe. Attacking peacekeepers is a serious violation of international law. And I mean, I'm assuming you're pretty shocked by that. Well, nobody's attacking them deliberately. They're in the middle of a war zone. They say it was deliberate. UNIFIL says it looked like extremely deliberate attacks. That's what they say. The Prime Minister has warned the UNIFIL troops, who are absolutely not done their job. They're in the way. They've said leave, because all they're doing is hindering our own operations. So there was nothing deliberate. Nobody's attacking peacekeepers. What we're trying to do is get rid of the terrorists that have been arming themselves to the teeth under UNIFIL's nose with absolutely no intervention from the international community that put UNIFIL there to begin with. Like I said, we're doing the job that UNIFIL was incapable of doing. So the best thing they can do right now is get out of the way.
But with all due respect to your Prime Minister, isn't it only the UN Security Council that can decide if UN peacekeepers are located from one place to another?
Maybe it is, but if they are in harm's way because we're fighting a war we didn't start, then the smart thing for the Security Council would be is to remove them, especially when the Security Council hasn't bothered to check whether they've been actually doing their job for the last 20 years. And in fact, we know that they've been doing the opposite of their job. They were always a bit of a toothless force. Hezbollah are, a very aggressive terrorist entity. And under their noses, probably knew it, Hezbollah have been arming themselves, making tunnels, creating military bases under those tunnels, hiding rockets in people's homes. They've been doing that with UNIFIL there. So if they're not going to help, they should really get out of the way.
With regards to comments levelled at the UN and UNIFIL specifically by a number of Israeli officials, but I want to pick out the comments made by Eli Cohen, the Minister of Energy, who said that UNIFIL is a useless force, the UN is a failed organisation. Is it helpful to undermine the significance of an institution like the UN that's been helping to maintain international peace and security since 1945?
Well, they haven't helped us very much, to be honest, apart from giving Israel our birth certificate. In the last 20, 30 years, all we've seen is the UN backing anti-Semitic resolutions against Israel. When you look at the record of the UN Security Council and the General Assembly, and you see that in an average year, there's 20 resolutions against Israel and one against a country like the Islamic Republic of Iran, one against Syria with 500,000 civilians slaughtered, then what credibility does the UN actually have?
Speaking of Iran, your country was attacked almost exactly 2 weeks ago by a barrage of missiles from Iran. Very limited damage, but a significant attack nevertheless. 2 weeks on, no response from Israel. What's taking so long?
Well, I'm not a military expert and I'm not in that room, but I'm assuming that we're trying very hard not to retaliate in a way that could cause a huge regional conflict, because who wants that? We didn't want any conflict to begin with. And Israel has to measure its response very well. I think it shows that we're not acting out of any type of impulse. We're acting very decisively, and we're acting strategically rather than just impulsively attacking back at a country who essentially set out to destroy us that night for the second time this year.
And with regards to diplomacy, to try to prevent the conflict you described, which some people who've spoken to us have actually said has actually already begun, that regional conflict is already underway. In fact, we had a US ambassador last week who said it is underway, so no point speculating on it about to begin. The French and Iranian presidents have been talking. Initiative being shown by Paris. I assume there's not a huge amount of dialogue between Israel and Iran. Do you think their discussions, which according to reports were aimed at de-escalating the situation, will or can bear any fruit?
I'm not sure. It depends really how much the Islamic Republic of Iran see a regional conflict as a threat to the regime. I actually think that they are concerned about a regional conflict. Their own people don't want them. So this could be the opportunity for the innocent people of Iran who've been subjugated for decades by this regime, for killing women, raping women, putting them in jail for showing a strand of hair, killing gay people. So in terms of their own people, they don't have much support in their own country. So I think the Iranians are very, very concerned of a regional conflict that could essentially remove them from power. Whether the French president will be successful in getting some type of regional de-escalation or not, we'll have to see. But let me tell you, if there is going to be a regional de-escalation, it has to include the return of our hostages that are still living in dungeons in Gaza.
Yeah, just picking up on that point, and we have had people again on this channel who've speculated on, how Iran is a divided country. Its leadership is isolated from large sections of the population. But one thing that's really going to give everyone something to rally around and galvanize support for the Iranian leadership would be an attack, a severe attack from Israel. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think that's true, actually. We get messages every single day from Iranian people. We've seen them protesting on the street saying Israel is the only country with the courage to save us from these monsters. So I actually think the Iranian people, for once, are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here.
Okay, so more needs to be done to reach out to them. One video message from Benjamin Netanyahu, probably not enough.
I totally agree. There's a lot of people reaching out to them on a daily basis. And I myself, just as a personal, get hundreds of messages every week by innocent Iranians who are telling us, we're with you, and we don't want our regime anymore. We hate our regime. They kill our people, our innocent people. There's zero freedoms. And Israel is the only country with the courage to stand up to them.
There's so much more we could talk about, but I'm being told we're out of time. So we're going to have to wrap it up there. But I'd like to say a very big thank you to you once again for being with us on Al Arabiya. Fleur, Hassan-Nahoum, thank you.
Thank you.
To the United States now, where Donald Trump's campaign team have asked Homeland Security for more protection for the former president. This after a man was arrested at the Republican nominee's rally in California during the weekend. Officials say the man was found in possession of a shotgun, loaded handgun, ammunition, and fake passports. All of this comes just 3 weeks before Election Day and just weeks after previous attempts on Trump's life. Well, for more on that, I'm joined now by the former FBI agent Bobby Chacon, who joins us from the US. Great to have you with us, Bobby. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. It's been, what,
Tom, thanks.
3 days since that alleged incident in California. An investigation is underway, but are we finding out anything new or any more details about just what happened or didn't happen there in California?
Yes, we are. I think the sheriff initially came out, and the local sheriff, whose deputies performed the arrest, came out and said that this was a threat to Trump. And however, very quickly followed up by that was the U.S. Secret Service and the FBI. The federal authorities had come in and said they quickly looked at this individual and said they didn't think that this was an attempt on Trump's life or this was any kind of assassination attempt. So the individual has simply been charged with a local gun charge and released. He was released on bail, and so he's out. If the investigation had uncovered anything that that led them to believe this person might have been a threat to Trump, they would have done something to detain him further.
But there will be, it's understandable that there's a degree of nervousness. I mean, this is the third time that Donald Trump has been in the headlines for precisely this type of concern, a massive concern about his security. But it sounds to me like he wasn't actually in any significant danger, therefore, on Saturday.
You're correct. That's correct, Tom. You're absolutely correct. It doesn't seem like he was any kind of threat. I think this person wasn't hiding in the bushes like we had in Florida or taking a shot from a rooftop as we had in Pennsylvania. This is a significantly different event than those two. This simply had several guns in his car. He seems to be some kind of digital journalist. He seems to be actually a Trump supporter by looking at his social media. So this doesn't appear to be an active attempt to harm Trump. It seems like he just had illegal weapons in his car because he traveled from Nevada, a neighboring state, to California, into California, which has strict gun laws. An alert deputy did their job. They noticed something suspicious about the car. It had a fictitious, I believe, license plate on it. And so he investigated further, and he found that the guy had two loaded weapons in the car that he shouldn't have had. So they arrested him on local charges. So I think everybody's erring on the side of caution now that several attempts have been made on former President Trump's life. And this is an example of erring on the side of caution, taking him out of there, charging him locally. But be sure, if there was any kind of suspicion or evidence that he was a further threat to President Trump, that the Secret Service or the FBI probably would have filed additional charges to detain him further.
But there are a lot of strange things about the man's profile. You mentioned the suspicious license plate, a car full of weapons. He had multiple passports. I mean, Who on earth was this man?
Yeah, it seems like I'm not sure the right-wing extremist would be the right word, but he seems to be a conspiracy theorist. His online, he's a part of an online group that who puts out like documentaries that are about the deep state, what they call the deep state here, which is a very groups that are very suspicious of the government and always alleging that the government is up to nefarious purposes, and so they release these documentaries that are basically conspiracy theories. And so I think he's part of a group like that. So, a little bit of a kind of a different character. And so I'm not sure about the passports and the driver's license and different names on why he would have those. But I think that probably the FBI and the Secret Service looked over those documents and said they were probably for different purposes other than harming the president.
Yeah, it was passports and license plates rather than driving licenses that were found to be suspicious, according to reports. I just want to ask you, given that this is now the third time that we at Al Arabiya News have had to talk about President Donald Trump, or former President Donald Trump's security, do you think there are some changes being made? Do you think there's already been a rethink? Do you think it's already affected how he can campaign? What do you think's changed since the first of these incidents, which was by far the most serious, that one in July?
Yes. There have been significant changes. I think they upgraded, and President Biden had actually said that President Trump will now have the full protection that a sitting president would have. The sitting president and the sitting vice president have the highest level of protection. Then former presidents have lower levels depending on the threat level. But since the threat level against Trump now has heightened, so has his protection. And so now, and even as late as last week, the Trump campaign asked for and received some additional military protection from the U.S. military. And those are things like surveillance drones to be flown over these rally sites and things like that. So there's extra protections that have been added to Trump. And apparently he's being protected at the level of a sitting president, which is a lot. And that also brings in U.S. military assets to his protection apparatus. So there have been significant upgrades to his security. Now, whether or not that impacts his campaigning, we're in a very tight race, and President Trump likes to do these outdoor rallies and have a lot of people there. And so he seems to be on schedule. He did one, I think, in Reno, Nevada, the day before the California one. And then after the California one, he went to Arizona and did another one. So it doesn't seem to have impacted his schedule much. But certainly his security has increased.
Yeah, we understand the Trump campaign is asking for military aircraft with anti-missile capabilities. That's according to a report filed by CNN. I'm wondering what the chances are, in your opinion, that his campaign team would be granted such a security detail.
Yes, Tom, I think that request grew out of the Homeland Security had briefed the Trump campaign on the threat from Iran, which they considered a legitimate intelligence threat. They considered the information legitimate, that Iran did put basically a price on Trump's head. And so I think that in response to that, Trump's campaign wanted, because that would be obviously a more sophisticated level of attack capability that the government of Iran would bring. So they asked for that kind of stuff. And I think that they have added some military surveillance equipment, drones and things like that, that would pick up on something like that. President Biden, I don't know if he was serious, but half jokingly said, as long as we'll give them everything they want as long as he doesn't request F-15s. So I think that might have been a little tongue in cheek, but I think that that's the level of security that they're bringing to Trump now. I think they're bringing additional military assets because of that threat from Iran, which is obviously would bring in a more sophisticated level of attack.
I just want to ask you about your own experience as an FBI agent and securing a major event with a very large number of people at it. How can you ever be sure that a gathering of thousands of people is going to be entirely risk-free for the people standing on the stage in front of everybody?
Yeah, unfortunately you can't. It's never 100%. I've protected two Olympics, the one in 2002 in Salt Lake and the one in 2004 in Athens, Greece. And I was involved in the security of both of those events, very big, large global events, people coming from all over the world, heads of state coming to some of the venues that we had responsibility for. The best you can do is, minimize those attacks, trying to do pre-event investigations, pre-event threat assessments, and try to lower the threat level. But you can never be 100% secure. But you try to limit them, mitigate them, and then minimize any kind of threat. And then you have a plan in place if a threat actually happens. How do you get your protectee off the stage to a safe location and things like that? So you never can be sure to be 100%, but you do everything you can to minimize that something might happen. And then if something does happen, you have a plan in place to protect the person you're protecting and get them out of the harm's way as quickly as possible.
I mean, the fact that we're finding out about these foiled attacks, none of them has been successful. This latest incident on Saturday was someone in the vicinity of an event who happened to have weapons. I mean, the fact these people are being found suggests, before they can act, suggests that the security surrounding Donald Trump is actually doing a remarkably good job, doesn't it?
I totally agree with you. And I think that those are the lessons learned. And each time we go through one of these events, we call lessons learned. And I think in Pennsylvania, you saw those faults. You saw those mistakes that were made. And I think, the sheriff's deputies there and the Secret Service there were called into question. And I think they learned from that. And I think the deputies here erred on the side of caution. And anybody that even looks suspicious is going to be talked to, is going to be confronted, is going to be questioned and possibly searched. And so I think you're right. I think that this is a sign that we've learned the lessons of Pennsylvania, and more now the deputies are, eyes are more alert. They're attempting to address more people that may look even possibly suspicious, because erring on the side of caution now, of course, is the way to go, because if these threats are legitimate. We've seen 2 legitimate threats so far, possibly a third. So I think that the security apparatus is doing its job. And I think this incident on Saturday proves that. I think you're absolutely right that this is a proof that it's working and people are being approached. And even if this turns out not to have been a threat to Trump, they did the right thing in searching him, finding those weapons, and removing him from that venue.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like the sort of person you don't want in the possession of a large cache of weapons. For people who are watching who are perhaps a little bit cynical, who thinks perhaps all of this plays somehow to Donald Trump's advantage, perhaps giving him a little boost in the polls when he needs it, people feeling sympathy for him. It is, after all, publicity, and we are talking about Donald Trump. What do you say to those cynics out there who think that perhaps this isn't doing Donald Trump's hopes any harm whatsoever?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, when a person comes within a quarter of an inch of a bullet going through their brain, it's hard to say that they would be in favor of that. And additionally, President Trump has never been the type of person who lacks for public attention. The media seems to eat him up, whatever he says and whatever he does. And he doesn't need someone to shoot at his head to get that kind of publicity. He seems to be someone who is a publicity magnet. Even when these attempts weren't taking place, he got his fair share, or more than his fair share, of coverage by the media, at least in the United States.
This is my last question to you. I mean, as an American and as someone who clearly keeps a close eye on security and political developments in the country, have you seen anything like this, in the run-up to an election, this degree of concern about the safety of one of the candidates in that race?
No, I was born during the President Kennedy administration, who was obviously assassinated. And then in 1968, we had Bobby Kennedy. His brother was murdered, assassinated while he was running for president. But I was 5 years old at the time. And since then, President Ford, I remember being shot at twice while he was president, President Reagan while he was president, but never in the lead up to an election, other than in 1968 when Bobby Kennedy and Governor Wallace later was shot. We haven't seen any of this in 50 years or more. This type of threat to one of our candidates. And we've had contentious elections before, but we've never seen this type of movement to do harm to one of the candidates. Not in my memory. I mean, I remember President Reagan getting shot. I remember President Ford getting shot, but those are 2 sitting presidents, not in an election, in a lead up to an election. I can't recall, of course, like I said, in 1968, we had some of that, but like I said, that's almost half a century ago. So no, these are very, very uncommon times.
Yeah, really unprecedented, isn't it? Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, though. Sure. Former FBI agent Bobby Chacon, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.